Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome you to the BRIC Summer Engagement Series. This is a 5-part webinar series, and this is our 3rd week. And we're really excited today to get into what building codes mean to the BRIC program. We've had a great turnout so far, and we're expecting another great crowd for today. So before we get started, let me go over a few logistics. Today's session is being recorded. We will be posting this along with our other 4 engagements on our FEMA's YouTube channel, as well as providing copies of our PowerPoint. So look at the BRIC website. There'll be a link at the end of the presentation showing you what that is. And on our website, you can find links to those presentations. Because we have so much content for you today with some really great speakers, we're not going to be able to take question and answers in today's session. But please know that after the Notice of Funding Opportunity comes out, starting around mid-August, we will be having heavy engagement, talking all details of the BRIC program, and have lots of time for Q&A there. If you do have technical issues during today's presentations, you will see a technical questions and support pod. Please go there and ask your technical questions, and we will have moderators who come and help you. You can also find on the Adobe Connect today a section or a pod that says File Downloads. There's a couple of pieces in there that I would like you to download sometime during today's presentation, and that includes a copy of today's presentation. There's some really great links in today's presentation that go to different YouTube videos and different information, as well as you'll see something called the BRIC infographic, and that is just a 1-page flyer about the BRIC program. So let me go over the lineup for today's session. First off, I'll be handing over the webinar to Mr. Carlos Castillo, who is the FEMA's Acting Deputy Administrator for Resiliency. After he speaks, I will be coming back on to talk a little bit of specifics about the BRIC program and how building codes fit into it. Then I'll be handing over to John Gargiola. He's one of the lead physical scientists at FEMA working in the Building Sciences branch, and he's going to talk even more about the state of the union of building codes and different resources that FEMA has regarding building codes. Then we're going to go to a couple of our partners who are in the industry and hear from them about building codes, and that includes Mr. Gabe Mazur, who's the Vice President of Government Relations and National Strategy at ICC, or the International Codes Council, who will discuss the importance of building codes from the council. And then closes out, we'll have Pam Williams, who's the Executive Director of Build Strong Coalition, who will discuss the importance of building codes from the Build Strong perspective. So with that, let's get started. Mr. Castillo, I hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you, Camille. Good afternoon. As mentioned, I'm the Acting Deputy Administrator of Resilience here at FEMA. I oversee national continuity programs, national preparedness programs, and grants, insurance, and mitigation. Mitigation, of course, is a key part of resilience. And speaking of mitigation, I'm excited to be speaking today about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. This 3rd session will focus on the importance of strong building codes in the context of resilience and the BRIC program. Like many of you, I started my career at the local level. My time with Miami-Dade County in Florida gave me an appreciation for the use of building codes. For example, in Hurricane Andrew, when that affected South Florida, we believed our South Florida building code was the best in the country. Andrew showed us our weaknesses. We also believed the federal government would handle everything for us. Well, Andrew taught us to be self-sufficient as much as possible. Local government is really where the rubber meets the road for resilience. In recent years, we've seen natural disasters devastate communities and destroy homes and businesses. Damage costs exceeded $135 billion in 2018-2019 and affected tens of millions of Americans. And amid this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, when we're seeking safety in our homes or essential office spaces, we're reminded why the structural safety of these places must be of the highest standard. A recent National Institute of Building Sciences study found that adopting modern model building codes saves $11 for every dollar invested through earthquake, flood, and wind mitigation benefits, with a 4-to-1 wildfire mitigation benefit. These are more than just numbers. This considerable savings represents avoided casualties, less post-traumatic stress, reduced property damage, fewer business interruptions, and lower insurance premiums, and quantifies the significant role that modern codes have in protecting us from the destructive forces of disasters, whether from nature or other causes. But the truth is the nation can do more to maximize these benefits through broader adoption and enforcement of these codes across the country. A different set of data from inspecttoprotect.org reveals that, unfortunately, nearly 2/3 of our nation's jurisdictions don't currently have a recent edition of the model codes in place, with a minimum hazards provision intact. This gap is a risk that we must work to close in order to achieve uniformity and resilience nationwide. FEMA places a strong emphasis on building codes because they enhance public safety and property protection. FEMA's disaster assistance programs, aided by the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, or DRRA, of 2018, are expanding the ways in which building codes are used and incentivized pre- and post-disaster. The BRIC program in particular will fund building code activity and provide capacity for communities to modernize and enforce more resilient building codes. By using BRIC for modern code adoption and enforcement, we can ultimately strengthen community resilience nationwide. With that, I'll hand it over to Camille Crane, FEMA's BRIC Section Chief. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carlos. So let's get started then with first talking about how we see BRIC playing out or how we see building codes, playing out in the BRIC program. So that comes through in a few different ways. First off, through the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, throughout the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, you'll see mentions of building codes, including in Section 1234 or 1234, which is the BRIC program. Through the BRIC program, it gives us a broad adoption or broad support to increase the adoption and enforcement of building codes. One of the first ways is the law actually talks about the projects that we fund, especially those construction projects, must conform with one of the latest 2 published codes for that project type, because we know that different project types are subject to different standards or different codes. So, for example, if it's a building project, that would be the 2015 or 2018 International Building Code. And one thing I would like to say is that's a minimum for what we would like to see. So it's one of these conforming with one of the latest 2 published codes. We always support communities going stronger in code as long as the project stays feasible and cost effective. So that's the first way. The second way is we are actually going to fund building code work, or we're going to have that as fundable mitigation activities. And I have a slide in a few minutes that will go more into detail about that. Also, codes are very much a priority of the program and will play a part in the competition. To that, one thing I really want to talk about is we have both code adoption and then how communities are actually enforcing their code, or how they are using the code in their communities. And one of the ways that that's graded or assessed is with the Building Code Effectiveness Grading Schedule, what we call BCEGS. This is, as you can see on your screen, hopefully, an independent assessment of a community's building code adoption and enforcement, and it results in a score, with 1 being the best and 10 being the other end of it. So it's kind of similar in its rating. If you're familiar inside the flood program with CRS, the community rating system, it kind of follows that same measure. It is independent, done by ISO or in a bureau state, and there's about 5 of those done by the state. One thing to know is a community can get one of these surveys. If you don't have a BCEG score or you've never had one of these surveys done, you can get one of these surveys at no cost. And it also does not negatively affect anything in the community's rating. So, I don't want anyone to be afraid, if I get this and I don't get the result that I expect in the score, that might negatively affect something. It doesn't. But generally, it does take about 2 to 4 months to complete the survey. So if communities are interested in applying to the BRIC program and have not had a BSEG score done, we really want to encourage them to look into this. And you'll see on the right, there's where you can go and get more information. There's a website there at www.isomitigation.com/BSEG. And also there's an email inbox that if you have questions about BSEG surveys, please feel free to look at that email or email that email inbox. So let's talk a little bit about this community or capability and capacity building project type. So this is funded through the state or territory allocations. That allocation amount will be coming out with a notice of funding opportunity, hopefully next month is the plan, or through the tribal set-aside. And so you'll see here there's a variety of different project types that we include under capability and capacity building, building codes being one of those. So there's different types of activities. We want to support communities and building codes across the program or across the kind of life cycle of codes, I guess you would say. So for some communities, that will be they don't have a code at all. And so we could support them looking into adopting a code. For other communities, they may have a code, but they want to do activities that would increase their BSEG score, for example. Then we would help support those activities to increase the BSEG score. We also heavily heard through the stakeholder engagement we did in summer of 2019 when we talked about building codes with stakeholders around the country that there just was a need for more training. So we can also support professional development across the community to learn more about code. I wanted to give a couple of different case examples to look at how both communities and states have enacted really good codes and found mitigation or resiliency results from doing that code work. And so I wanted to start with the city of Colorado Springs in Colorado. There is, from 2012, there was a Waldo Canyon fire that devastated Colorado Springs. It ended up burning over 18,000 acres and damaged around 350 homes and cost 2 lives. But it could have been worse. Before 2012, Colorado Springs had applied for a PDM grant and started implementing their, basically to write a wildfire mitigation plan. They had started implementing that plan, and because of that, they were able to show that during the Waldo Canyon fire, they estimate they saved about $75 million and 250 homes. They didn't stop, though. They've continued to enact stronger building codes as it relates to fire resistance. They have continued to do robust mapping on their wildfire risk and heavily engaging with their community so that people understand what their wildfire risk is to their property. Particularly, City of Colorado Springs Fire Department has collaborated with Colorado Springs Housing and Building Association to do to figure out what the impact of wildfires are on residential buildings. All this has led to ordinance number 1850, which amended the International Fire Code to address wildland-urban interface for wildfire risk. On top of that, they've also wrote a manual for ignition-resistant construction design so that people can further understand how to take proactive measures. What I really want to point you to is a couple of links on the slide. One is to a 14-minute video that FEMA produced along with the City of Colorado Springs that talks about their holistic approach using code to reduce the wildfire risk for Colorado Springs. And that 14 minutes can say it a lot better than I can. You'll also see a link to a story map that was created, which is a great GIS product that tells the story of Colorado Springs. Looking from a state perspective, I want to point to the state of Florida, and I appreciated Carlos talking about his time with Miami-Dade. To echo that, Florida in 2002 enacted a statewide building code that was really strict on buildings, especially that that could withstand hurricane impacts. An analysis that was done after by Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania showed that homes that were built after 2002, so since that code had been enacted, drove down losses from hurricanes by 68% compared to homes that were built before 2002 and the enactment of that code. The code understands that there is variety or there's variances in what needs to be done throughout the state. So, for example, Miami-Dade and Broward County that have had extensive, substantial damages from past hurricanes are now part of the high-velocity hurricane zone, which means their local code requires the entire envelope be protected. According to the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, Florida has the strongest residential building code out of 18 coastal states. Both of these are just examples that I wanted to highlight today of how at both a local level and a state level, enacting stronger codes has really offered mitigation benefits. So with that, I would like to turn it over to John Gargiola from FEMA's Building Science team to give us even more information. John, I hand it over to you.
Happy to continue the discussion about building codes and resilience. And I'd like to start with this graphic that Carlos spoke about, but really this reflects the series of studies and reports that have been put out in the last couple of years from the National Institute of Building Sciences that truly illustrate and demonstrate the value of mitigation. In these different columns here, they represent different parts of the series of the study. The last column represents the study on mitigation projects, and FEMA participated in that study, which is the updated version of the original mitigation saves from about 15 years ago, I think. So, but take a look at the second column, and here the NIBS project team looked at the benefits of designing buildings just to meet the minimum consensus requirements of the 2018 International Residential Code and the 2018 International Building Code, and compared that to prior generations of codes represented by 1990 era design and minimum floodplain requirements. And you see there's the number that Carlos mentioned, 11 to 1, and as it's broken down across the different hazards. And not stopping there, in the first column here to illustrate the benefit of going above minimum code, remember that second column is just the minimum. We see that $4 saved for every $1 spent building above and beyond these minimum codes of recent edition like 2015 or 18. So just to show some of that visually. But with all these benefits, how are we doing as a nation? Are we maximizing this return on investment we spoke about from these codes in our states and jurisdictions? Well, let's see. So if we look at this map, if we look at the adoption of codes that we've been talking about, the 2015, 2018 IBC-IRC, and checking to see that these minimum hazard-resistant provisions are intact where they apply with the hazards that I mentioned. Well, these green areas represent a little more than the 1/3 that was mentioned by Carlos of jurisdictions that have these hazard-resistant codes intact. In fact, the percentage has risen slightly to 37%. Well, there are definite opportunities to increase that percentage, and we hope that BRIC will be one of the catalysts, along with the efforts of our partners, and you all can join us in this call to action to increase the use and adoption of building codes across the country. Another thing to point out is, addressing a lot of times the common response is, well, I don't know what codes we have or where to look. So today, there are many new resources available to help individuals find out, which building and residential codes are in effect in their area. So here are 4 publicly available resources, including a brand new one from this last one. What was the third one? The Building Code Adoption Tracking Portal. But the first one is a great resource, inspecttoprotect.org. Here there's building code information. Just type in your address. And not only that, there's a whole toolkit with resources and commentary and excellent media and outreach resources as well. So the one on the bottom is the National Building Code Assessment Report, last published in 2019. I encourage you to download that and take a look and see how does your state measure up with these codes and how do they look in comparison to your neighboring states. And our partners at ICC have great building code adoption resources now available. You just click on a state and up comes that state with the latest information that they have on the codes that are adopted. And then I mentioned this last one. This is a new portal recently launched, and here users can find very detailed and granular information on cities and counties throughout the U.S. With some of the particulars that I've been talking about, the addition of the code and the underlying hazards that apply. This data represents roughly around 22,000 jurisdictions across the U.S., and it's growing. This data is updated on a quarterly basis, and it goes through a QA/QC process. Oops, excuse me. So here I just want to affirm again the emphasis on building codes. It continues to grow here at FEMA with many different examples from our strategic plan to the new Stafford Act requirements stemming from the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. And one of the reasons we're here talking about the BRIC requirements on Section 1234, but there's other requirements now in Section 1235B and Section 1206 and 1241. There's also a standing policy on disaster risk reduction minimum codes and standards and public assistance minimum standards. We're always also interested at FEMA in how buildings perform after disaster, and taking the knowledge and those lessons learned and seeing if the codes need to be strengthened as a result. We have a long history of doing that, and also we take that knowledge and we participate in the development of these voluntary private sector consensus codes and standards. So as Camille mentioned, there's many opportunities to think of good and effective projects to submit under the BRIC program. And if you think about it, it's more than just, hey, adopt a code or update a code. Take a look. I mean, it's the administration of the codes, how you do that. What is the training and the certification of those code enforcement personnel? What are the qualifications that they have? Are there just basic contractor and builder licensing requirements put in place? And how does the public find out and learn about the building codes? Public awareness programs are part of the administration. And think about it in conducting the business of building codes in your plan review and in your inspections in the field. What do those staffing levels look like? Is there enough staff for the amount of activity, what is the level of detail that's involved in these plan reviews or these various special inspections or routine inspections, and what are some of the QA/QC measures that that you have or would be desirable to put in place. So lots of ideas here. Hopefully some of these resonate with what's needed or what you're thinking about you might need help with. And I just want to finish up by saying back to the growing emphasis on codes at FEMA. This extends into our 10 regional offices, and today those offices are being provided more and more information about building code data and building code adoption in the states in their region. So what I've provided here, I encourage you to utilize. These are the POCs for each region, these building science / building code POCs, and I encourage you to reach out to them and get some information and help advance what you want to accomplish with building codes where you live and work. So for that, I just have 2 more slides, and saving the best for last, right? So I'm also excited. Some of this was shared earlier in the virtual ASFPM conference, but FEMA is conducting its own building codes losses avoided study, which we're calling FEMA Building Code State SAVES. And this is going to quantify comprehensively the economic losses avoided from state and local adoption of these modern hazard-resistant building codes and standards we've been talking about. Just from these preliminary findings that we're sharing here, and we continue to work on to add the rest of the states across the country. Adopting hazard-resistant codes will avoid billions of dollars in future losses and provide sustainable return on investment. So there's a link there. We have a page, and just encourage you to check and anticipate the full release of this report later this summer or early fall. Great, and we do have a central page, FEMA.gov, for building code resources, different excerpts and different fact sheets and such, so encourage you to go there. And also, if you can't find something, here's our helpline, email and phone number. So again, thank you, and guess I'm turning it over to Gabe and ICC.
Great, thanks, John. I appreciate the intro. So as John mentioned, I'm with the International Code Council, which is a member-based nonprofit. We're driven by our 65,000 members across the country, who include building officials at state and local levels, folks in the fire services, builders, architects, and engineers. We facilitate the development of model codes that help ensure building safety, resilience, and sustainability. The codes are adopted or in use in every state and territory, as well as in federal buildings, domestic military bases, and our country's embassies abroad. Our codes are model codes, so to have effect, they need to be adopted by a state or a local jurisdiction. The codes are also updated every 3 years. Each new update offers improvements over the prior edition, capturing lessons learned from disasters, advances in technology and building sciences, and best practices. FEMA dedicated an entire session on building codes for BRIC because of their foundational role in community resilience. John touched on the loss avoidance study and the NIBS report that found the 11-to-1 return on investment from adopting current codes. Some additional recent studies found a 90% decrease in average claims after Hurricane Harvey, where modern codes flood resilience provisions were followed. They also found reduced hail damage in Missouri by 10 to 20% based on the adoption and effective enforcement of hazard-resistant codes. The takeaway from this slide and these studies is that codes provide significant mitigation benefits against a variety of natural hazards in states across the country. An adopted code isn't worth much more than the paper it's written on if it's not effectively implemented. Through adequate building department staffing, as compared to permitting loads, as well as through adequate training and competence testing through certification. Effective implementation is critical. FEMA found that code implementation challenges could have accounted for as much as a quarter of the $16 billion in damages that Dade County suffered following Hurricane Andrew. Researchers found similar results 25 years later, that effective enforcement can reduce losses 15 to 25% beyond the benefits the adopted code provides. As John noted, how codes are adopted varies considerably across the country. In some states, codes are adopted statewide. In home rule states, code adoption is determined jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Some states employ hybrid models, where some codes are adopted statewide and others are locally determined. Jurisdictions adopting model codes frequently include state or locally specific amendments. Jurisdictions can also be on differing code additions or vintages. Just like code adoption, enforcement practices vary. Some states require local enforcement, while in others, enforcement is at the option of a given locality. The mitigation value of codes will be the greatest where an up-to-date code addition, including its hazard mitigation measures, is adopted and effectively enforced. Housing affordability is one of the main concerns that comes up when communities are considering adopting stronger codes. The good news is that contemporary research continues to find that modern model building codes have no appreciable implications for housing affordability. After Moore, Oklahoma experienced its third violent tornado in 14 years, the city significantly strengthened its building code. The expectation was that housing costs would increase because none of the communities around Moore followed suit. Yet researchers found that the change to a stronger building code had no effect on the price per square foot or home sales in Moore. The principal investigator for the National Institute of Building Sciences report that's already been mentioned found that improvements to model building codes resilience over the nearly 30-year period study only increased a home's purchase price by around 0.5 percentage point in earthquake country or in an area affected by river rain flood. The Association of State Floodplain Managers found that the insurance savings from flood mitigation provisions in modern codes can reduce net monthly mortgage and flood insurance costs by more than 5%. In addition to the resilience benefits, adopting and effectively implementing up-to-date codes provides jurisdictions with additional benefits. This has been mentioned by John as well, both through FEMA's programs and through private sector initiatives. Under the DRRA and the BRIC program, a community is adopting and enforcing hazard-resistant codes is a consideration for FEMA in awarding BRIC funding. Adopting and enforcing hazard-resistant codes is also a consideration for the agency in determining the federal share for public assistance funding post-disaster. Adopting modern codes flood mitigation provisions is a prerequisite for attaining Class 4 under the National Flood Insurance Community Rating System for flood insurance, and that can generate a 30% premium reduction. In the private sector, code adoption and enforcement data is part of filed insurance credits in most states. This information can play a role in insurance offerings as well as established rates. So how could you leverage BRIC to promote community resilience through code activities? You could use BRIC funding to help communities adopt a code, and there are still communities, including those that face significant hazard risks, that have not adopted construction codes. You could adopt a new code that addresses a hazard your community faces. Wildfires have destroyed tens of thousands of structures in the past decade. 1/3 of all United States homes are now located in the wildland-urban interface. Our International Wildland-Urban Interface Code addresses ignition-resistant construction, defensible space, and building and water supply access for the fire service. NIBS found that it can provide as much as $6 or more in mitigation benefits against wildfires for every dollar invested in high-hazard areas. If your community faces wildfire risk, that's a code you might want to consider adopting. You could also consider updating an existing code to a current edition. Codes are continually updated with lessons learned, advances in technology and building sciences, and best practices. If you're on an outdated code, BRIC funding could be used to get up to date. For code adoption or updating, BRIC could provide assistance in developing the code or analyzing a model code for a local fit, as well as for implementation costs. Code adoption or updating is a powerful way to promote community resilience because it locks strong standards into new construction and modification. Buildings can have a lifetime of 50 or 75 years or more, so it's really important to ensure those investments are built to last. BRIC could also provide assistance in improved code enforcement, including through virtual capability development. That's something I'll discuss on my next slide. And it could also be used to provide training or certifications on existing or updated codes. Training and certifications are critical aspects of effective code implementation, and they're a factor in how a community scores in terms of its building code effectiveness, as well as the loss avoidance benefits that effective implementation provides communities. And note that all these possibilities are low cost and they provide significant mitigation benefits. They also provide co-benefits through incentives in FEMA's programs and through the private sector. The pandemic has created new challenges for every industry. In ours, the pandemic has brought to the forefront virtual capability gaps that exist for some code departments. The Code Council surveyed code officials from more than 1,100 jurisdictions from every state. We found that while nearly every department is still working, and that's because DHS in every state deem them to be essential, and 2/3 of them are working remotely, about 3 in 10 departments didn't have the capability to conduct electronic permitting, 4 in 10 lacked the ability to conduct remote plan review, and 6 in 10 lacked the capability to conduct virtual inspections. The virtual capability gap undercuts the important role that code officials play in ensuring building safety during the pandemic by, for example, ensuring safe construction of temporary structures that are intended to provide medical surge capacity. These gaps also undercut code officials' ability to facilitate the construction necessary to our response and economic recovery. We've seen this bear out in construction industry surveys that found increased wait times for both plan review and permitting during the pandemic. The BRIC program presents a great opportunity to address this capability gap for code departments. Doing so would ensure they can continue their vital health and safety functions during the pandemic, can improve community resilience given strong code enforcement can reduce losses, reduces pandemic-induced permitting delays, and produces lasting reductions in departmental operations costs and permitting timelines. This last slide includes some links on additional information on the mitigation benefits from adopting and implementing up-to-date codes. Also has information on code adoption status by state, codes and housing affordability, as well as contact information for Code Council regional staff across the country. There's several links with additional information on virtual capability needs and solutions. For those interested, the Code Council is hosting a webinar next Thursday, the 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern on electronic permitting and online code software solutions and opportunities that might be available through the CARES Act. Information on the webinar can be found through the Going Virtual link that's on this slide. I've also included my contact info. That's it for me, so many thanks to FEMA for the opportunity to present, and with that, I'll turn it over to Pam Williams of the Build Strong Coalition, who's been a longtime advocate on these issues and who's a great resource. Pam?
Thank you so much, Gabe. Very, very much appreciate being able to be here with our friends and partners at FEMA, talking about an issue that truly is finally seeing the attention and excitement around it that it should. So first and foremost, we are talking about one of the things that can drive the most significant increase in resilience in your community. We're not only talking about money, we're talking about saving lives, saving properties, and it's finally, after decades of work, that great people like John and FEMA, that we are able to start to put the right resources in the hands of locals. But we all know that this is a really, really hard conversation in some places. There's issues like home rule and certainly politics that come into play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to leverage what FEMA is doing to hopefully get the conversation moving in the right direction. So who am I? Who is the Build Strong Coalition? So the Build Strong Coalition was certainly one of the driving factors behind the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. They bring together emergency managers, the fire community, certainly our partners at ICC, code specialists, contractors, people that work in infrastructure, particularly lifeline infrastructure, and they were all focused on how do we increase resilience across the nation, because we have this trajectory of disaster costs and losses that is not sustainable. We cannot rely on the federal government to bail us out, to make us whole. So how do we change that conversation? And that's where the Build Strong Coalition came in, bringing a lot of resources and data to the table to help try to convince policymakers something that so many of us, and particularly the folks at FEMA and ICC, have known for a long time, that investing in building codes and the enforcement of building codes will dramatically reduce the damage that you experience from risks and hazards. So let's talk a little bit about the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, something I hold very near and dear to my heart. We're not only talking about BRIC. Some of the provisions within DURA have to do with disaster recovery, have to do with disaster response, and not only mitigation. So we are at a point in the conversation where we have broken down those stovepipes of the different stages of disasters and understand that when you start having a successful conversation about risk identification and how you draw down those risks, you are helping your community survive disaster and withstand disaster and come back to work just as soon as possible through every stage of a disaster. So we're talking about leveraging the resources of BRIC in a way that will help you secure additional resources in disaster recovery, that will help you avoid damage for disaster recovery. And that's a very, very exciting conversation because no longer is the mitigation and pre-disaster mitigation conversation stovepiped alone and by itself. People are beginning to understand that mitigation, and particularly with codes and standards, if you have that right conversation, you are helping yourself with not only FEMA lines of funding, but HUD lines of funding and other resources that are available to you. This also represents a tremendous opportunity, just like Gabe discussed, to bring in new partners, alliances, and coalitions. We all know that where the boots hit the ground is at the local level, and getting codes adopted and enforced is a tough job, particularly in this COVID environment where everyone has too much on their plate and many, many competing priorities. So what you can do is, again, leverage the resources and the support that you're getting from FEMA and from BRIC to help draw the right people to the table. These are new and exciting private sector partners that also have a vested interest in reducing risk and saving money and protecting their community. And these folks can help you in your planning, risk identification, code adoption, particularly in some of those more difficult political environments. These are your community partners. Don't hesitate to tap into them. And thankfully, BRIC is wholly supporting that and provides resources, again, to really, really get that across the finishing line and support communities in doing the next right step to protect themselves for disasters. So we've all seen this, and you guys are probably getting tired of seeing this return on investment, but this is our just say no. This is our, our stamp, our motto. We want people to understand that while we live in an environment and a country where we can be wholly reactionary and wholly expecting things just in time, if we do the right thing up front, there is so much return on that investment. We know we have the right answers, and now it's putting the right resources into your hands as applicants and sub-applicants and community partners for getting resilience done so that you can help make the right things happen and we stop seeing this unsustainable trajectory finally start to bend. And that's a very, very exciting thing, and that's why we hone in so much on these cost-benefit returns. One of the exciting things about FEMA's programs, and one of the reasons why Congress was so very supportive of expanding and enhancing pre-disaster mitigation, was because all FEMA programs for mitigation have to be risk-reducing and cost-effective. They are not throwing money at the problem. And FEMA, I know FEMA will have a future training session specifically on cost-benefit analysis. That is a wonderful tool that can help you get through your community conversations to identify the best steps and the best projects to draw down disaster hazards in your community. So more things that we're talking about: lives, money, property. These are things that you know, but keep them in your quiver to remind people that it's worth the investment. It's worth the lift, because we are talking about protecting property and certainly protecting our communities from financial loss. Again, disasters are not only a federal job. FEMA is never going to make you whole, your community whole, and this is why resilience is such an important conversation, because what we realize is resilience is a network. It is a system of systems, and it's only as strong as its weakest link. So when we're investing community-wide, regional-wide, statewide, even nationally, we are building up a level that is truly going to support each other in these savings and avoidance of loss. We all know, particularly in this COVID environment, how difficult and how impactful it is when businesses can't get up and running. We have learned that a business closes for 2 weeks and might never open again. And there are certainly a lot of conversations, and FEMA is driving that as one of their strategic priorities as well, to make sure that businesses are protecting themselves through insurance and through risk mitigation. But if we can do the things that we need to do as communities in adopting codes and standards and making sure that there are appropriate land use regulations, then we can make sure that our businesses are supported and our communities get people back to work and economies back up and running. That is a huge, huge benefit of this type of mitigation, and certainly the focus on codes and standards. So I do want to say a little bit more about insurance, because we are talking a lot about money, because money talks, right? And there is an opportunity here, just like John spoke about, particularly with the BSEG scores and making the right investments. There are ways that people and insurance companies are going to see a massive reduction in their risk profile and in their risk exposure, and that drives down premiums. That's good for me. That's good for you. So again, all of this stems from that fundamental principle that when you have identified the right standards, the right codes for your community and enforce them, that this stuff can flow from that. And BRIC is giving us the resources and FEMA is giving us the support to be successful in that conversation. And that's something that we've been waiting on for decades. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our key partners, the Institute for Business and Home Safety. So one of the things that we do at Build Strong is we've realized in this COVID environment that one of your key lifeline pieces of infrastructure and sheltering is your home. So how can we drive the increase in residential resilience? And there are a couple of states doing some amazing work, yes, with federal support, to provide individual grants to homeowners to do retrofits, whether it's increasing against earthquake hazards, wind and hurricane hazards. And this is, what we're seeing is that this is changing the risk and exposure at that critical community level and transforming these communities. And that's something that's exciting. That's something that BRIC is available to support. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you consider what increasing residential resilience can do for your community, for your overall regional risk profile. There are amazing findings from IBHS, wholly based in science. Again, that's one of the things that is wonderful about FEMA. We're not talking about conjecture or we feel this. This is grounded in science, facts, and data. And IBHS is one of our key partners that they do the testing on different techniques of residential resilience so that we can see what sort of return and what sort of strengthening we get from implementing those techniques. So I highly encourage you to learn more about IBHS, some of their recommendations, and to look at how your community can support residential resilience on the individual basis as well as on a much greater scale now that we've got resources and support. And we all know that clearly building codes have a lot to do with that conversation. Imagine if you could drive a community to ensuring that they were going to withstand a Category 3 hurricane just because of an increase in building codes related to roof tie-downs. That can dramatically change the risk profile of a community. We've seen it happen in Florida. We've seen it happen in other communities, and particularly coastal states. Those simple changes, and that's why the reports that FEMA is about to release are going to be so important. We see in a very, very tangible way the immediate impacts of increasing those codes and standards. So again, I can't say enough about how the stakeholder community and your community partners want to be involved in the successful implementation of BRIC at the local level. You have an opportunity to tap into a workforce. You have an opportunity to tap into free labor, free people that want to help educate the echo chambers, the force multipliers in your objectives. Do not underestimate the power of private sector partners and creative coalitions that you never thought would be at the table together to get your objectives accomplished, particularly when we are talking about things like building codes and pre-disaster mitigation. You can get lots of attention from lots of different community leaders, and this is really one of the best ways to start leveraging the resources that FEMA is making available. And I can't emphasize enough, we're not only talking about pre-disaster mitigation. I love that BRIC is focused on that, but if you are successful here in the risk identification and in identifying what you need to do to address the challenges facing your communities, you are going to be successful throughout the disaster life cycle. So with that, I'll wrap up. You're certainly welcome to reach out to me, to the Build Strong Coalition, to tap into some of our resources. But as always, just so thankful for all of the efforts that FEMA has put behind BRIC and ensuring that it's successful. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Camille.
Thanks so much, Pam. And let me start with thanking all of our speakers. Thank you, Carlos, for kicking us off. I really appreciated that you could talk about what your actual at local level, your perspective of the difference that code makes. Thank you, John, for talking about some of the resources and the data we have at FEMA. Looking forward to seeing what that loss avoidance study shows. Hopefully more evidence, I'm sure, of why codes are so important. Thank you, Gabe, for talking to us for ICC about your perspective and all you guys do with helping with codes, especially as I saw that top stakeholder engagement piece from last summer that they needed more training. I know you all offer tons of training, one that you highlighted next week, so thank you for that. And Pam, thanks for closing us out. I'm happy with the work you did when you were working in the government to get CRA passed, and now with the work you're doing with Build Strong too. I particularly enjoyed the emphasis you put on partnerships, as partnerships being one of the guiding principles of BRIC. I'm glad to see you really brought that in, that there is ways to be creative and be innovative with how we work with partnerships and helping communities get building codes or better their building codes. We definitely see building codes as a foundational element to community resiliency. I never get tired of seeing the slide that reports that federal grants that go into mitigation save 6 to 1, but if you saw on Pam's slide, a community that's adopted building codes saves 11 to 1. So that's an even greater perspective. So this is our third series. We do have a couple of more engagements coming up on July 22nd. So next Wednesday, we'll be talking about BRIC and community lifelines and getting a lot of information about what are community lifelines, how they came about, and how they apply in the BRIC program and how they apply to mitigation. And then we'll round out our 5-part webinar series on July 29th, where we'll talk about BRIC and nature-based solutions and also future conditions. And we have a couple of different NGOs, non-governmental organizations, as well as a couple other federal agencies who are going to chat with us about the importance of nature-based solutions. As I talked in the beginning of this presentation, We also then are going to be, after our engagement series ends in July, once our notice of funding opportunity is released, we'll be kicking right into NOFO webinars and notice of funding opportunity webinars. We'll be sending about 90 minutes a week, getting down deep into both BRIC and the Flood Mitigation Assistance FMA program. We're going to let those have about 30 minutes where we can also answer questions, so lots of time for Q&A. So with that, I thank you for joining us today. You will see coming up a polling, and we would certainly like, before you click off the webinar, to answer our polling questions. This gives us feedback how to build future sessions to make them even better. So once again, last call for the BRIC website, www.fema.gov/BRIC. That's where you can find all information that's publicly available right now for the BRIC program, as well as information on this engagement series. Those 2 sessions that are coming up over the next 2 weeks are full. We have reached 1,500 registrants, but you'll see as the sessions complete and we're able to complete the editing, we are putting up YouTube videos of each of these sessions, as well as copies of the presentation that you can download. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.